Hello, good people, and welcome to Excel Virtually Global. My name is Bernard Obeng Boateng, Microsoft Excel MVP. I'm also a Microsoft Certified Trainer. I'm lead trainer at Finance Skills Hub in Accra, Ghana. And my goal in this session is to walk you through how to build a dynamic actual versus budget dashboard that is going to be responsive to slices. We are going to go through just two tables to create this. Go through Power Query, Power Pivot to create our data model, and once we are done, we use our data model to create this dashboard. So join me in the next few minutes and let's go through this together. So this is our end product. In the end, we are going to have this actual versus budget dashboard that allows us to switch between an actual scenario and a budget scenario. We're also able to slice by department. Okay. And we're also able to see how the accounts come in the 12 month. We're able to slice and also see both actual and budget. And we are going to go through this using cube functions as well. So before we start, I'm going to walk you through how we can start with these two tables, actual and budget, and achieve this final product. So we have two tables, actual and budget, and we are going to append these tables using Power Query. And once we do that, we are able to get our dimension and fact tables, and in the data model, create our relationships. We are now going to export this into Pivot table, and to be able to use the layout that you saw, we insert our slicers and convert this into cube functions. With this background, we are now able to create our dashboard, and it is dynamic, of course. When the data updates, this whole dashboard also updates. So this is our journey. Let's get to it.
So we'll start off with these two data sets, actual and budget. And the first step is to convert these into tables. So standing in here, Control T, I'm going to name this actual, and Control T, I name this budget. So we are now going to load them into Power Query. So under data, I'll connect. It's always good to name your tables so that it's easy to reference and manage it in your Power Query. So my first query lands here. I have actual, and I'm going to actually copy this source M code and Alt HN for new source and then blank query, and I'm going to paste this. Because I named my tables, I can now change actual to budgets, so I can query my budget table directly here. So I'll stand here, F2, budgets, and I have my actual and budget in place. It is from these two queries that we are going to draw all our dimension tables. So first step is to add a custom column, and we are going to name this scenario. So for actual, we'll add a custom column, and when this opens up, we'll name this scenario, and the content is going to be actual. So it's going to help us get our slicers to switch between the numbers. So I'll click OK. It lands here. Data type is supposed to be text. This is supposed to be a date. It's always important you do this. So I'll come to budget, and I'm going to add a custom column to this as well. So we'll just do a quick walkthrough to be sure all our data types are correct. Seems fine. So we are now going to append these two tables and create a query called reference. And from this reference, we are going to draw our dimension tables. So standing in home, we'll come to append queries, and we are going to append queries as new. So this loads my budget table and then my actual table. These are the only two tables I have, and I click OK. So I now have the two here, F2, I'm going to name this reference. Okay, so now that I have this reference table, I'm going to start off extracting the account dimension table, the department dimension table, and then I'll also extract the scenario dimension table and also create a date table. So that's our journey in the next few steps. So I'll click here and I'm going to reference that. So it creates a copy here. So we are going to call this accounts. So to get only accounts, we are going to highlight account code and account name. These two move together. So this is going to be the primary key and it will give birth to the account names. So I'll right click and remove other columns. And while these two are still selected, I'll right click and remove duplicates. So I now have my unique list of account code and account names. Next up, I'm going to reference this as well. F2, I'm going to call this department. So just as we did, I'll highlight this, right click, remove other columns. Okay, so these will now represent our dimension tables. Now the next thing we're going to do is to create a sequential date table for our model. So Alt-HN, and I'm going to launch a blank query here. So I'm assuming that my dates are going to be in 2019 and I'm going to create date starting 1st January ending 31st December. But if you require a dynamic M code that will give you based on the minimum and maximum dates, I'll post that M code in the resources because of time. So you can invoke this sequential date using dates equal to list.date. Okay, so once you enter list.date, enter, you now can enter the parameters from here. So our beginning date is 1st January 2019 and I am creating 365 dates from here with one step. Okay, so this will now give me the sequential date. This is important so that I'm able to analyze all my dates and timelines accurately. So once I have this, I'm going to convert them into a table. So I'll click here and I'll leave the default as it is and I'll click OK. So this is my date table. F2, I'm going to name this date and come here and then name this date as well. Change data type and use the appropriate data type. So this is date. Now this is going to give birth to the year, the month name, and then abbreviated month name as well. So standing in add column, I'm going to extract the year portion, which is 2019. Stand here again, extract the month numbers, stand here, extract the name of month. Okay, but for our purpose, we are going to use an abbreviated name, month name. So we are going to extract the first 3 characters in here. So I'll stand in the add column tab and then extract first characters, so 3, and I click OK. So let me name this month ABB. We use this in our data model. So in the end, we have our 2 fact tables, our helper reference query, our accounts dimension table, department dimension table, scenario, and our date table. Now that we have all this, we can now come to home, close and load to, and we are going to load this as a connection and add all these to the data model straight away. Then you click OK. So we allow some time to load, and while it loads, we need to also be clear that the reference query is not going to be useful in the data model. So once it loads, you can go back here, right click, and then change the load type by disconnecting it from the data model. Okay, so we click OK. We haven't committed this to anything yet, so we can click OK from here. Okay, so now that we have these queries in here, we are now going into the Power Pivot data model to actually have a look at this table in the data model. So straight up we go to our diagram view, and here we'll set up our star schema. So let me just fit to screen so that we see all the... So our typical layout is to have actual here, and then we have budget here as our fact tables. Let me just expand this. And then we have our accounts dimension table, we have our department, we have our scenario, and then we have our date. We'll do the relationship connections from here. Account code is a primary key here, so we'll connect it to this, and then we also connect account code in budget to the account code here. And put this here as well. So this is the relationships created. Now, to make it easier for users, it's good to hide these duplicate fields in the dimension tables so that they don't have to use them in slicing. So I'm going to select account code, hold Control, and then we'll right click and hide these from client tools. Okay, so now that we've created our data model, we've connected our relationships, we can now exit out in our pivot table. So we'll exit out in our pivot table in a new worksheet, and then we'll click OK. Okay, so you now have all our tables here, including our local, actual, and budget. The main measure we are going to use in this dashboard is total actual and total budget, and we are going to create that using measures. So under Power Pivot, we go to measures, new measure, and this one is going to sit in the actual table, and we are going to name this actual. The formula is going to be equal to sum actual amount, and the format is going to be with 1,000 separator, 0 decimal places. Okay, so when we click OK, we now have our first measure here. Go back and we do same for budget. So new measure, this is going to reside in the budget table. We'll name this budget. We have actual and budget. Now we need to slice this by account names and the months. So while we are in the pivot table, we are now coming into the accounts dimension table. Look for account name. If we check it, it's going to come in here. Okay, and then while we are here, we'll also come to the date, and then look out for the month ABB, and then take this and put it here. So this is our default pivot table, but obviously there's something not right. The months are not sorted correctly, and our account names, we prefer the account names to be in the order that the account codes are in. So it has the sales on top, followed by expenses. So in this position, what we are going to do is we'll go back into the Power Pivot, and then we'll switch to data view. And what we are going to do is that we'll come to our accounts and then select the account name, and then we'll sort this by account code. So in account codes, the sales starts, which is the revenue or income, followed by expenses. So I click OK, and this has been done. I'll switch to my dates, and then I'll highlight my month ABB, and I'm going to sort this by the month numbers, okay, in here as month, and I click OK. Okay, so if I exit, I now have my sales starting sorted by my account codes, followed by discounts and then the expenses. Same has happened here as well. So we have our pivot table nicely laid out, and our next step will be to do the calculations for our dashboard. So if you look at our calculations, we have the months going through from January to December, and we are able to switch between actual and budget. Our account names are here, and then we have total, actual and budget here, and all these numbers respond to the slicer as well. So it's based on this layout that we are going to do our back-end calculations. For us to maintain the connection to the slicers, we'll need to convert the pivot table into cube functions, because the traditional pivot table will not allow you to insert rows. So if I want to even insert a column here, I get this error. Okay, so that's the reason we have to introduce cube functions, to maintain the dynamic connection to the slicers and lay it out properly. So to do that, stand in the pivot table, but before we do that, let's insert our slicers. So we go to Analyze, bring out our field list for our pivot table, and then locate the department table, right click, and then add as a slicer. So this brings the list of departments. We also do same for our scenario. So right click, and then we'll add this as a slicer as well. So I have these two slicers. I'm going to break this into 2 columns based on the design of our dashboard, and I'll also break this into 7 columns. Okay, so we have something like this. Okay, so let me just adjust that quickly. I'll insert some few rows above and then put in our slicers. So here we are. Our slicers are now controlling this. So we'll stand in here, and then under the pivot table Analyze, we'll select, and in the calculations group we can convert this to formulas. So we'll convert this to cube functions. Now if you are conversant with cube functions, you know the most popular cube functions we use are cube members, which represent the labels here, and then we also have the cube values, which are the calculations. Now we are also going to use cube rank member to actually fetch the output of our slicers. Any other that doesn't have a formula behind, when you convert to cube functions, will not be required in this calculation. So example, month up values can go off. Again, this will depend on the layout of your pivot table when you create them. So I'll delete this, and then we currently have that. So now that we have this layout, I'm going to insert 2 columns, Alt-IC F4. In the layout for our dashboard, we have total, actual and total budget here. So this is all the way to the end. So I'm going to highlight these 2 columns, cut, and then paste them here. So just to test, it still responds to our slicers. Okay, so next up, you realize that only the actuals came with a month ABB on top. So we are going to fill these blank cells with the names of the months. So I'm going to highlight the whole of this all the way to December. Control backspace to reset. F5 for go to special, Alt S, and I'm here, I'm selecting blanks, so K for blanks, and I click OK. Now these blank cells are selected. Press OK and then reference the left cell, and you press Ctrl Enter, and then all these months are filled in. Okay, so we are still laying out calculations for our dashboard. Now the first calculation we are going to do for our charts is going to be this trend chart. So the idea is to be able to see the trend of our actuals and budget, able to slice it by department and that. So I'll come here and then lay this out, actual, budget, and then the first month is January, and then Feb. So I highlight these two and then I'll stretch it out to December. My goal is to use Q value to calculate the total actual for each month, and then step in here and do same for budget. Now to do that, we introduce this formula, so cube value, and we'll start with the data model. So when you start the double quotes, the data model comes up, so you tab it and you close out your double quote. The idea is that based on the data model, we are going to use a Q value to draw this calculation from the measure side, especially actual, and then from the date side, the date month ABB from January. So if you're conversant with how this works, essentially we are just using these two sides of the cube. So I'll bring my double quote and then I'm going to choose measures, and then I'll bring a dot, and then from here I'll bring my actual. So this takes care of this side. I'll bring my comma and then proceed with the dates, and then here I am fetching month ABB. The good thing about Q value calculations is that you can also include slicers. So we want this to be controlled by the department slicer, and then we want this to also be controlled by the scenario slicer. Okay, so let's see what we get here. So here I have the aggregate value for actual, okay, for everything, but I need only January. So what we are going to do is we want to step into this actual and month ABB and reference them to these specific cells. So I'll stand in actual and then clean out the contents between the two square brackets. To reference a cell, we'll start with a double quote, bring the ampersand sign, and then bring a plus. So this allows us to reference the cell. So I'm going to lock this at column level, and then once you do that, you bring the ampersand sign and then you close it with a double quote. So this will make it easier to copy the formula across. Month ABB, we are going to replace this part with the same process, double quote, ampersand, we bring our plus sign, and then we select this cell, so F4 to lock this at row level, and then we'll bring our ampersand, and then we bring our double quote. So this will now give us the calculation for January for actual, and it's sliced by department and scenario as well. So I now have the actual value for this cell. I can now copy this down, Control D, and then all the way to December, Control R. I've just calculated the splits across the 12 months for actual and budget. So what we intend creating is a dynamic chart. Now I'm going to insert this line chart here and we'll work through this together. So Alt F1, and I'm going to change this to a line with markers, and I have something like this. Now please observe that if, let me pull this chart here. Okay, so if I select actual, only actual shows, but I don't want this to lie flat. I actually want only this to show without this. So, you know, in Excel you cannot plot NAs. So what we're going to do is to create a version of this formula that would make it spell NA when the slicer has not been selected. Ideally, S blank should work, but you realize that it gives us two false values. So I think a better formula will be S non-text. Okay, so S non-text will give us when the value is there and then when the value is not there. So we are going to wrap this original formula with an if formula. So if this is non-text, this entire value is non-text. Okay, our value is true is going to be the original formula. So I'll copy this and paste this here, and our value is false is going to be NA. Okay, so this will ensure that if this is not selected, it returns NA. So we'll go through this again, and then we have, so what's going to happen is that now if I select only actual, only this is going to show. If I select only budget, then budget is going to show. Our next calculation is going to be the calculation for our donut chart here. So our donut chart is going to be a version of this. So actual versus budget, and this time around we don't need the it's non-text we did earlier. So to save some time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this formula that we did. It's the same calculation, we just take out the scenario slicer for this purpose. So I'm going to paste this here, and then let this reference this calculation instead, and then we'll back out the scenario. Okay, so once we have this, I can now take this all the way to the end. Now what we intend doing is that at every point in time we want to see the total actual spent by each department. Okay, so that's why we left the department slicer in there. So let's calculate the total here. So I'll stand in here, alt equal to, this is the total for the entire organization, and then I'll do Control D for this as well. So let's do a test case for one of the departments. So I select project. Now you realize that project has spent only 4 million out of the 14 million. So we are now going to calculate the percentage spent. So percentage spent is going to be this over that, and this gives us 28%. So the amount that is remaining is the other part of the donut chart. So we are going to use 1 minus this to give us the amount outstanding. Okay, so this is for our charts. Now the challenge comes when people overspend. So let me just chart this and I'll show you. So if Alt F1 and I chart this using donut chart, okay, this works fine. So let me just include the data labels. So it's 29 out of 71. Now if I select a department that has overspent, like sales and marketing, you realize that even though they've overspent, okay, this chart really doesn't make sense. So what we are going to do is to cap this at 100%, so that if you overspend, we just have a full blue, and then we use the data label to show the number here. So what we are going to do is we are going to create a main formula that says that cap this at 100%, okay, or this one. So we'll ensure that if somebody overspends, our charting doesn't go beyond 100%. So again, this is going to be 1 minus this. Okay, so for this purpose, this is rather going to be our chart, and then we use this as labels. Okay, so in the end we are going to use these two to do our calculations. So the final calculation in this set is to harvest the selection from our slicers. So if I select actual, I want this in a cell so that I can use it in my calculations. And to do that, we are going to put our label here. So slicer output for scenario, and we are going to use the cube ranked member. Okay, so always start with a data model, and our expression is this slicer called scenario. Now what we are going to do is we are interested in the first thing that comes out of here, so we'll choose 1 for rank. Okay, so this is actual. When I click this, I have budget. There's a little caveat though, that if the user selects nothing, this reads all, but we'll take care of this when we design our dashboard. So we've just finished our calculations and we are going to move on to our dashboard design shortly. I'm going to rename this sheet calculations, and to our dashboard design, I've already laid this out. It's essentially a dark theme design filled with a dark gray. These are text boxes and I have border lines which are gray here. So the first thing we're going to do is to bring in our chart. So I'm going to cut this trend chart and then fit it in this space. So I'll just fit it in here. We'll come back and then format this. So we'll come here and also cut our donut chart. So I'll take this cut and then we'll fit this in the space allotted for it. So I'll just align this nicely. Again, we'll come back and make this nice. Next up is to bring in our slicers. So in the end, we want our dashboard to look something like this. So I'll hold this with Control and I'll cut. Now the moment I do this, because they are linked to my cube calculations, I'm going to lose my calculations temporarily. But I'll come back here and then I'll paste, and my workbook will now reset with my calculations. Now what we are going to do is to customize our slicer. So we go to the slicer tab, and these default slicer styles, we are going to duplicate one of it. So I'm going to duplicate this and I'm going to call this Finex. We are going to go through these slicer elements and format them appropriately. Highlighting this and that, I'll come to slicer and I'm going to choose this. I'll increase the height to about 8 and then we have something like this. So we'll come back and do the alignment properly. I'm going to stretch this all the way to the end. Okay, so we now have our slicer completed. So now that we are done with our slicers, we'll switch focus to our chart. So we are going to remove elements that we will not need. So for the budget side, we are going to make the line smooth just as we did. So we'll come here, to be our budgets and our actual. So now let's go to our percentage chart. So I'm going to filter actual and then let's say project. So for this, we're also going to remove the noise. We'll take away our data labels, and then while we are here, we'll go to our format and then we take away our shape fill as well. Now to match this, actual is blue, so we are also going to make this blue, and then we'll select the budget part, okay, and we are going to make it, instead of white, maybe a very light shade of gray. Okay, so while this is selected, we are coming to, so after we select this and then we press Ctrl+1 and we increase the donut size up to about 60. Okay, so while we have this, we can now put in our text box to show us the amount spent. So we'll go to insert and then we have our text box. So we'll draw this out, and then remember we did this calculation, so we'll select this, come into our formula bar and then go into our calculations and then look for that calculation for actual spent. Okay, so while this is selected, we'll come in here, put it in the middle and then center it. We'll bolden it a bit and then increase the font to about 14 and then take away the shape fill to no fill. And the final thing we are going to do is to make this white. I'm going to now take away the shape outline for this as well, and now we have this completed. So with this out of the way, let's go in and bring in our account names. So these are in our calculations here. So from sales all the way to utilities, I'm going to take off grand totals for this purpose. Now we are going to put in a series from 1 to the last one. So I'm going to drag this all the way to utilities, and I have 16 account names. So when I come to the dashboard, I'm going to use index match to bring in these account names. So equal to index. My result is coming from account name. I'll bring my comma and introduce match. So for match, when I switch to my dashboard, I'm going to use rows. Okay. Now the idea is that I'm going to select the row I'm in, colon to duplicate, and I'm going to hold the row portion of the first reference. Okay. And this is currently going to read 1. So that's my lookup value. My lookup array is going to be the portion here that has my series. So I select A to A, I bring my comma, 0 for exact match, close index, and I have sales. So I'm now going to bring this Control D, and I have this. Now if you look at the layout, we can easily bring in total actual and total budget. So for this purpose, let me take away the slices so you appreciate the full layout. So this is our total actual. Okay, so this is in column C and this is in column D. I already have a formula that brings a result from column B, so I'm going to copy this and then equal to and paste. So I'll switch this from B to C. for my percentage spent is going to be actual divided by budget, and I'm going to copy this down. I anticipate situations where I may get blanks or errors, so I'm going to wrap this around an if error, and I'll bring a space here instead of an error. So I'll copy this. Now my status is going to read, for all sales above a certain threshold I want green, and for all expenses above a certain threshold I want red. So for this, I'm going to reference this status and then Control D. These numbers are here, but we don't really need them to show. So for the expense part, I'm going to highlight just this part, go to Home, and then in Conditional Formatting, go to Icon Sets, and then More Rules. So I'm going to use this icon style, and the idea is I want it in reverse order. When we spend more than a certain threshold, in this case 67%, I'm going to change this to number. So when we spend more than 0.67, it should be red. When we spend more than 0.33, okay, it should be yellow, and then anything less than that should be green. So this is what I'm going to use. Now I'm going to just show the icons only, and then I'll click OK. Okay. Now the reason I left this out is this is revenue or income, and I expect this to be the inverse. So I'm just going to copy this format and then paste it here. However, I'll come back to Conditional Formatting, Manage Rules for the entire worksheet, okay, and then I'm going to edit this one, and then for this particular one I'm going to reverse the order, and I'm going to click OK, so that sales has a different conditional format. So that is going to be for this part. So after calculating for the spend and status, let's check if our numbers are responding to our slicers. So when I select actual, I get only actual here, and I select budget, I get only budget here. But what we really want is that these numbers should not respond to our slicers. So we'll do that correction in our calculations. We'll come here. Remember, we put in a scenario slicer, so we are going to back this out for this, and then back this out for this one as well. So for these two, it should only filter or slice by department. So once you've done this, you now realize that it's only the charts that respond to these. Okay, so apart from the chart, we are also going to create this final calculation that will switch actual and budget numbers. So we have this range. So when I select actual will pop up here, vice versa for budget. Now we are going to use index match to bring in these numbers. But before we do that, understand that we are drawing our answers from this layout. For each month we have actual and budget. Okay, now what we're going to do is we want to concatenate these two labels, okay, and then take it all the way to the end for December. Now remember, when we choose our slicer, it outputs actual or budget here. So our goal is to join this label to this output and then use it to fetch the actual number that we are looking for here. Okay, so to do that, we are going to use the index match. So we'll start equal to index. So index, our results is going to come from here, which is January, all the way to December. So when I highlight this, I'm going to do F4 to log this absolutely. I'll bring my comma, and I'm supposed to provide my row number. So my row number is going to be the account names. So I'll bring match, and I'll go in here and I'll select the first account name, which is sales. I'm going to make sure it doesn't move column wise, so I'm going to log this at column level. So I log this, I'll bring my comma. Now my lookup array is going to be the accounts in my calculation here. So I'll highlight from sales utilities, F4 to log this absolutely, and then comma 0 for exact match. I'll close off my match. So I've satisfied my row part. I'll bring my comma and introduce match for the column. So for match for the column, my lookup value is going to be a combination of this January. I'm going to log this at row level, and I'm going to join this with whatever this slicer outputs here. So again, I'm going to log this absolutely. So this is my lookup value, and then my lookup array, I'll bring my comma, is going to be this concatenation that I did. So I'm going to log this absolutely. I'll bring my comma, and then I'll choose 0 for exact match, close this off for my column, and then close the final bracket. So I'm going to get this, and I'm going to copy this all the way to the right, and then I'll copy this down. So now the basic idea is this: if I select actual, I should get actual. If I select budget, I should get budget. Okay, so this makes it dynamic. And we need to take care of situations where if the user selects nothing, instead of this NA, we'll wrap it around an if error. So this original formula, I'm going to step in and then come here and wrap this around an if error. Control R, and then come all the way here, and then Control D. Okay, so in the end, if there's nothing selected, we don't get anything here. If I select actual, I get actual. If I select budget, I get budget. So that is going to be my calculation for this part. So we're almost there. We've calculated, but for these three boxes. So we have total actual, total budget, and budget balance. We have these calculations here. So remember when we were creating our actual and budget, these represent our total actual and total budget. So the balance is going to be a subtraction of these two, and this is our balance. So it is these three numbers we are going to carry to those three boxes. And looking at the space, it will be good to truncate. So Control 1, I come to my custom, and this I'm going to add 2 commas to knock off the million part, and then M for my millions, and I click OK. So these are now going to go into the box. So I'm going to select the first one, stand in my formula bar, come to my calculations, and then select this. So when this lands, I'm going to just increase the font to about 28, make the font white, and come to my total budget equal to, come to my calculations, and then select this one, my budget balance, come to my formula bar, and then I'll select this one as well. I'm going to select the formats for the first one, and then touch this and touch that, and I'm good. So final touches, we are going to select this and then take away the shape outline, and then we'll do same for this one as well. So F4 will repeat my last action, and then let's open this up a bit so we can see our percentage. So in the end, we've created this dynamic dashboard that is able to slice by department. We are also able to switch actual and budget. Okay, so once you have these numbers in place, you are now able to use your scenarios, actual or budget, to view in the way you want it. So please take the learning, and thank you so much for staying with me. I appreciate your time.